There is a dangerous kind of arrogance that comes with a badge and a gun, the delusional belief that state-sanctioned power makes you untouchable. When two small-town police officers decided to brutally humiliate a homeless black man seeking shelter in a local diner, they thought they had found a completely helpless target. They saw a worn-out field jacket, dirt-smudged boots, and a man society had supposedly forgotten. What they didn't see was the silver star pinned to the inside of that coat. They didn't know they were backing a highly decorated war hero into a corner. And they certainly had no idea that the quiet, unassuming man they were shoving around was one phone call away from utterly destroying their lives. The rain in Silver Creek, Washington didn't just fall. It felt like it attacked, a biting, relentless downpour that seeped through layers of clothing and chilled you to the bone. For Samuel Whitaker, the cold was an old, familiar adversary. His knees and lower back kept a meticulous record of every brutal night spent sleeping on concrete, every freezing bus stop bench, and every combat drop he had survived decades earlier. Samuel walked with a distinct measured limp down Elm Street, his shoulders hunched against the wind. His olive-drab M65 field jacket, a genuine surplus relic, was thoroughly soaked, darkening the fabric to the color of wet moss. Beneath the wide brim of a faded canvas hat, his dark eyes scanned the wet pavement. He wasn't looking for trouble, and he wasn't looking for pity. He was just looking for a temporary reprieve from the sky. Up ahead, the neon sign of the Rusty Spoon Diner buzzed and flickered, casting a warm, reddish glow onto the slick sidewalks. It was a relic of a bygone era, a classic aluminum-sided diner that had somehow survived the town's aggressive gentrification. Samuel pushed through the heavy glass door, the small brass bell above chiming a cheerful welcoming note that felt entirely disconnected from the reality of his life outside. The diner smelled of stale tobacco, hot grease, and robust coffee. To Samuel, it was the scent of absolute heaven. He stood just inside the doorway on the rubber welcome mat, deliberately taking a moment to shake the excess water from his jacket so he wouldn't track mud across the checkered linoleum floor. Discipline was ingrained in him. You respect the establishment, and maybe, just maybe, they'd respect you back. "Evening, Samuel," a soft voice called out from behind the counter. It was Betty Thompson. She was a woman in her late 50s with a chaotic nest of graying blonde hair and a permanent look of exhaustion around her eyes. Yet she possessed a genuine kindness that the town hadn't quite beaten out of her yet. Betty wiped her hands on her apron and grabbed a thick white ceramic mug. "Evening, Betty," Samuel replied, his voice a deep, gravelly baritone that commanded an automatic, albeit subtle, authority. He walked slowly to a small, isolated booth in the back corner, his usual spot when he could afford to come in. Samuel reached into the deep pocket of his wet jacket and retrieved a small, zippered canvas pouch. His thick, calloused fingers, scarred from years of hard labor and a past life he rarely spoke of, clumsily manipulated the zipper. He counted out his assets, 3 crumpled $1 bills and a handful of quarters and dimes. Betty walked over with a steaming pot of decaf in her right hand. She didn't wait for his order. She simply flipped the mug over and filled it to the brim. The steam curled into the air, warming Samuel's face before he even took a sip. "Cold one out there tonight, huh?" Betty asked sympathetically, sliding a few extra creamers across the Formica tabletop. "Yes, ma'am. Slices right through you," Samuel said, meticulously flattening the wet dollar bills on the table to dry. "Just the coffee tonight, Betty. Here's for the cup and a little extra for your trouble." He slid the money toward her. "Keep your money, Samuel," Betty said, frowning slightly. "The boss isn't here tonight. It's on the house." Samuel gently pushed the coins back toward her. "I pay my way, Betty. Always have. Take it, please." Betty sighed, knowing better than to argue with his pride. She scooped up the exact cost of the coffee, leaving the tip on the table. "You holler if you need a refill." She smiled and walked back to the counter to wipe it down. For a while, Samuel was at peace. He cradled the hot ceramic mug in both hands, letting the heat slowly bleed back into his freezing fingers. He watched the rain lash against the large diner windows, his mind drifting back, as it often did when it rained, to the humid jungles of Central America and the dusty streets of Mogadishu. He remembered the weight of his rifle, the brotherhood of his unit, and the day his life changed forever. He had given his youth, his blood, and a significant portion of his sanity to his country. Now his country had politely asked him to sleep under its bridges. The quiet sanctuary of the diner was violently shattered by the harsh strobing glare of blue and red lights flashing through the rain-streaked windows. A Silver Creek Police Department cruiser had pulled up parallel to the curb, its tires squealing slightly on the wet asphalt. Samuel's posture changed instantly. The relaxed slump of a tired old man vanished, replaced by the rigid, hyper-aware stillness of a seasoned combat veteran. He didn't turn his head to look, but his eyes tracked the reflection in the window. 2 doors slammed shut. Heavy boots hit the pavement. The diner bell didn't just chime. It seemed to scream as the door was shoved violently open. A gust of freezing wind rushed in, carrying with it officers Derek Harlan and Brandon Cole. Harlan was young, built like a linebacker, with a tight buzz cut and an aura of aggressive entitlement that practically radiated from his pores. He had been on the force a couple of years and spent most of his time trying to prove he was the hardest man in the county. His partner, Cole, was older, heavier, and deeply cynical. Cole was the kind of cop who had stopped caring about the community years ago and now merely saw the public as an ongoing annoyance. The 2 officers stomped their boots on the mat, their eyes immediately scanning the nearly empty diner. Betty stiffened behind the counter. She knew exactly why they were here. The city council had recently passed a strict, albeit legally dubious, anti-vagrancy ordinance, and Harlan had taken it upon himself to become the town's personal pest control officer. Harlan's eyes locked onto the back booth. A cruel, predatory smirk curled the corner of his mouth. He unhooked his heavy Maglite flashlight from his belt, slapping it rhythmically against his palm as he walked down the aisle. "Well, well, well," Harlan announced loudly, his voice booming through the quiet diner. "Look what the rain washed in. Smells like a wet dog in here, doesn't it, Brandon?" Cole chuckled, a wet, phlegmy sound, lingering a few paces behind with his thumbs hooked into his duty belt. "Sure does, Derek. Good thing we stopped in. Could be a health hazard." Samuel didn't look up. He kept his eyes fixed on his coffee mug, taking a slow, deliberate sip. He had dealt with men like Harlan before, bullies who hid their cowardice behind uniforms and regulations. Harlan stopped right at the edge of Samuel's booth, leaning his imposing frame over the table, deliberately invading Samuel's personal space. The smell of cheap cologne and damp wool filled the air. "Hey, Pops, you deaf?" Harlan snapped. "I'm talking to you." Samuel slowly lowered his mug. He looked up, his expression completely blank, betraying zero emotion. "I hear you, officer. Is there a problem?" "Yeah, there's a problem," Harlan sneered, tapping the heavy flashlight on the edge of the table. "This establishment is for paying customers, not a homeless shelter. We got a new ordinance in town, in case your fried brain missed it. No loitering." "I'm a paying customer," Samuel stated calmly. He pointed a steady finger at the small paper receipt Betty had left next to his change. Harlan snatched the receipt up, looking at it with exaggerated disgust. $1.50. You think buying a cup of dirty water buys you a hotel room for the night? Drink up and get out. You're trespassing. Betty couldn't take it anymore. She stepped out from behind the counter, her face flushed with anger. "He is not trespassing, Derek. He paid for his coffee and he's bothering no one. Leave him alone." Harlan whipped around, pointing his flashlight directly at Betty's face. "Back off, Betty, unless you want me to call the health inspector tomorrow and tell him about the rat problem you've got in the back booth. Or maybe I arrest you for interfering with an official police investigation." Betty froze, intimidated. She needed this job desperately. Samuel saw the fear in her eyes and intervened. "Leave the lady out of this," Samuel said, his voice dropping an octave, the gravelly tone sharpening into a razor's edge. "She has nothing to do with your power trip." Harlan turned back, his face turning an angry shade of crimson. No one talked to him like that, especially not a street rat. "Stand up," Harlan barked. "Right now, let's see some ID." Samuel didn't move. "I haven't committed a crime. I have no obligation to provide identification under a Terry stop without reasonable articulable suspicion of a crime." Harlan and Cole exchanged a look. The homeless man knew the law. That only infuriated Harlan further. "Oh, we got a street lawyer here," Harlan mocked, his voice rising in volume. "I'm giving you a lawful order to stand up, vagrant. If you don't, I'm taking you in for resisting arrest and disorderly conduct." "Disorderly conduct requires a disturbance," Samuel replied, his voice still terrifyingly calm. "The only people disturbing the peace in this diner are the ones wearing badges." "That's it," Harlan snarled. He lunged forward, grabbing Samuel by the collar of his wet jacket, attempting to violently yank him out of the booth. But Samuel was heavier than he looked, grounded by a low center of gravity and decades of martial discipline. As Harlan pulled, Samuel shifted his weight, refusing to budge. In the struggle, Harlan's arms swept across the table, knocking the ceramic mug over. Scalding hot coffee splashed across the table, pouring directly onto Samuel's lap. Samuel winced slightly but didn't cry out. He simply looked down at the spilled coffee and then slowly up at Harlan. The look in Samuel's eyes sent a brief icy spike of genuine fear down Harlan's spine. It was the look of a man who had seen death, dealt death, and was entirely unafraid of the bully standing over him. "Get up! Put your hands behind your back!" Cole yelled now, finally moving forward, unsnapping the retention strap on his holster, trying to escalate the situation to justify the use of force. Samuel slowly wiped the hot coffee from his trousers with a napkin. He realized he was backed into a corner. If he fought back, they would shoot him and claim he was aggressive. If he submitted, they would beat him in a dark cell and throw away the key. He needed a different tactical approach. "Okay," Samuel said quietly. "You want me out? I'll go. But I need to make one phone call first to arrange a ride." Harlan laughed, a cruel barking sound. "A ride? Who's going to pick you up? The garbage truck?" Samuel reached slowly, keeping his hands entirely visible, into his inner breast pocket. Cole's hand rested heavily on his forearm. "Watch his hands, Derek." Samuel pulled out an old, ruggedized flip phone. It was completely outdated, a brick of black plastic. He flipped it open. "You got exactly 30 seconds, old man," Harlan threatened, backing up slightly but keeping his hand on his taser. "Then you're leaving in cuffs." Samuel dialed a 10-digit number from memory. He didn't dial a local shelter, and he didn't dial the public defender's office. He dialed a private, unlisted Washington, D.C. mobile number belonging to a man who owed Samuel his life. A man who currently sat as a heavily feared and highly respected federal judge on the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, Judge Philip H. Caldwell. The phone rang twice. Samuel brought the phone to his ear. The diner was dead silent, save for the rain lashing against the glass and the heavy breathing of the two enraged police officers. A voice answered on the other end. "It's Whitaker," Samuel said softly into the receiver, his eyes locking dead onto Officer Harlan's badge number. "I need a favor. I have a pest problem." The heavy flip phone sat on the Formica tabletop, its tiny green screen glowing faintly in the dim light of the diner. For a fraction of a second, the sheer absurdity of the situation stalled Officer Derek Harlan. A homeless man in a soaked surplus jacket had just placed a call to an unknown number, referring to two armed police officers as a pest problem. Then the hesitation vanished, replaced by a surge of white-hot, uncontrollable ego. "You think you're funny, old man," Harlan barked, his hand snapping out to grab the phone. But before his thick fingers could wrap around the plastic device, Samuel smoothly slid it an inch to the right. Harlan missed, his hand slapping uselessly against the wet table. "The line is open," Samuel said, his voice entirely devoid of fear. "He can hear you." Harlan's face contorted into an ugly snarl. "I don't care if you've got the Pope on speed dial. You're done." Harlan lunged. He didn't use his taser. He wanted this to be hands-on. He grabbed the lapels of Samuel's soaked M65 field jacket and violently yanked the older man upward. Samuel, anticipating the physical assault, offered no resistance. He allowed himself to be pulled from the booth completely limp, a tactic designed to neutralize the momentum of an attacker. But Harlan was riding a wave of adrenaline and blind fury. He drove his forearm into Samuel's chest, slamming the veteran hard against the edge of the adjacent booth. Betty screamed from behind the counter, "Derek, stop it! You're hurting him!" "Shut your mouth, Betty, or you're next!" Officer Brandon Cole shouted, finally stepping fully into the fray. He unclipped his handcuffs, the metallic jingle slicing through the tension. Harlan spun Samuel around, shoving him face first against the reinforced glass of the diner window. The impact rattled the pane. "Stop resisting! Stop resisting!" Harlan yelled, the standard rehearsed mantra of a corrupt cop ensuring his body camera audio recorded a justification for his brutality regardless of the suspect's actual behavior. Samuel wasn't resisting. His hands were flat against the cold glass, his feet spread shoulder-width apart. He knew the drill. Any twitch, any attempt to protect his face from the glass would be classified as assault on a police officer. He took a slow, steadying breath through his nose, compartmentalizing the sharp pain radiating from his bruised ribs. "Hands behind your back!" Cole commanded, grabbing Samuel's left wrist and wrenching it upward at a painful angle. The steel cuffs ratcheted tightly around Samuel's skin, biting into the bone. Harlan grabbed the right arm, hauling it back with unnecessary force to complete the binding. Back on the table, The old flip phone remained undisturbed, its speaker silently broadcasting the entire violent symphony. Thousands of miles away in the hushed mahogany-paneled study of a Georgetown townhouse, the Honorable Philip H. Caldwell sat frozen in his leather armchair. The federal judge for the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals had been awake late, meticulously reviewing appellate briefs when his private unlisted cell phone rang. Only 3 people in the world had that number: his wife, his daughter, and Staff Sergeant Samuel Whitaker. Years earlier, during a fierce operation in Panama City, a young Lieutenant Caldwell had been pinned down behind a burning Humvee, his radio destroyed, and a piece of shrapnel embedded in his thigh. It was Samuel Whitaker who had laid down suppressing fire, sprinted across an open intersection, thrown the bleeding lieutenant over his shoulder, and carried him several blocks to an evacuation zone while taking a graze to his own shoulder. Caldwell owed his life, his career, and his family to the quiet, stoic man on the other end of the line. Through the earpiece, Judge Caldwell didn't just hear noise. He heard the distinct, undeniable acoustics of an unlawful assault. He heard the crash of the body against the table. He heard the waitress cry out, "Derek, stop it!" He heard the sickening thud of Whitaker being shoved against the glass and the cowardly, performative shouts of, "Stop resisting!" Caldwell's jaw tightened until his teeth ached. He didn't yell. He didn't panic. Men with true power rarely do. Instead, a cold, terrifying calm settled over him. He lowered the cell phone to his desk, leaving the line open, and picked up his encrypted landline. "They're taking him out," Harlan said through the cell phone speaker. "Grab his garbage." Caldwell dialed a number he hadn't used in years. It rang once. "Director's office, Night Watch," a crisp voice answered. "This is Judge Philip Caldwell, Ninth Circuit," he said, his voice a low, commanding rumble. "Connect me to Special Agent in Charge Thomas Brennan at the Seattle field office. I don't care what time it is there. Wake him up. I have an active deprivation of civil rights occurring under color of law in Silver Creek, Washington, and I want federal boots on the ground before sunrise." Back in the Rusty Spoon diner, Harlan snatched Samuel's flip phone off the table. He looked at the screen, saw the call timer still ticking, and let out a derisive snort. He pressed the end call button, severing the connection, and shoved the phone into his own pocket as evidence. "Let's go, hero!" Harlan spat, grabbing the chain of the handcuffs and roughly marching Samuel toward the door. Samuel walked in silence, his head held high despite the humiliating circumstances. The cold rain hit him instantly as they stepped out of the diner, the freezing wind cutting through his already soaked clothing. Harlan opened the back door of the cruiser and shoved Samuel inside. The plastic back seat was hard and uncomfortable, smelling faintly of vomit and strong disinfectant. Cole slid into the driver's seat, wiping rain from his face, while Harlan climbed into the passenger side, a triumphant, adrenaline-fueled grin plastered across his face. "Central, this is Unit 4, Cole keyed his radio. "We are Code 4 at the Rusty Spoon, transporting one adult male to county holding. Charges are trespassing, resisting arrest, and assaulting a police officer." Samuel sat in the dark, his hands going numb behind his back. He looked out the rain-streaked window as the cruiser pulled away from the curb, leaving Betty standing in the diner's doorway, her hands covering her mouth in shock. The officers thought they were taking out the trash. They had no idea they were driving straight into a hurricane. The Silver Creek Police Department was a squat, brutalist concrete building constructed in the late 1980s, designed with the sole purpose of looking intimidating. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed with a headache-inducing frequency, casting a sickly yellow pallor over the scuffed linoleum floors and the bulletproof glass of the intake desk. Desk Sergeant Roy Bennett, a 20-year veteran coasting comfortably toward his pension, barely looked up from his crossword puzzle as Harlan and Cole hauled Samuel through the heavy steel double doors of the Sallyport. "Look what we dragged out of the gutter, Sarge," Harlan announced, his chest puffed out, clearly proud of his catch. Bennett sighed, capping his pen. "Another vagrancy caller, Derek?" "The chief told you to stop filling up my cells with these guys unless they're actually breaking things. The county complains about the food budget." "He was breaking things," Harlan lied effortlessly, violently shoving Samuel toward the booking counter. Samuel stumbled but caught his balance, refusing to fall. "Refused a lawful order, assaulted me, and resisted arrest, plus trespassing at the Rusty Spoon." Bennett raised an eyebrow, looking Samuel up and down. He saw the soaked field jacket, the muddy boots, and the stoic, unreadable expression on the older man's face. Bennett had been on the job a long time. He knew what a violent drunk or a desperate junkie looked like. The man standing before him looked like neither. He stood at attention, perfectly balanced, his breathing slow and measured. "All right, empty your pockets," Bennett instructed routinely. "Harlan, take the cuffs off so he can process." Harlan scoffed but complied, unlocking the steel bracelets. Samuel brought his arms forward, slowly rubbing the deep red indentations on his wrists. He didn't massage them with self-pity. He merely assessed the tissue damage with clinical detachment. "Jacket off too," Harlan ordered, stepping close to Samuel's personal space. Samuel slowly unzipped the heavy soaked M65 jacket. It was the only thing standing between him and hypothermia. But he slipped it off his shoulders and laid it gently on the metal counter. Inside the right breast pocket of that jacket, carefully wrapped in a waterproof plastic sleeve, was his DD-214 discharge paperwork and a small velvet box containing the silver star he had never worn in public. Harlan grabbed the jacket roughly, indifferent to the weight or the history woven into the fabric. He began aggressively patting down the pockets, pulling out a few damp dollar bills, a half-empty pack of stale gum, and the old flip phone he had confiscated at the diner. He tossed the items carelessly into a plastic gray bin. "Name?" Sergeant Bennett asked, poising his pen over the booking log. "Samuel Whitaker," he replied, his voice calm, echoing slightly in the sterile room. "Address?" "Currently unhoused," Samuel stated factually. Harlan snickered. "He means he sleeps in the dirt like a stray." Bennett shot Harlan a tired look. "Shut up, Derek. Let me do my job." He turned back to Samuel. "Take off your belt and your shoelaces, Mr. Whitaker. You know the drill." Samuel complied in silence. Within minutes, he was marched down a stark, bleach-smelling hallway and locked inside holding cell 3. The cell was nothing more than a 6x8 concrete box with a stainless steel toilet and a metal bench bolted to the wall. It was freezing. Without his jacket, Samuel was left in a damp flannel shirt, shivering involuntarily as the precinct's aggressive air conditioning blew directly on him. He sat on the edge of the metal bench, rested his elbows on his knees, and closed his eyes, waiting. Back at the front desk, Harlan was leaning against the counter, bragging to Cole about how he had handled the situation, completely oblivious to the silent alarm bells that were already ringing in the highest echelons of state and federal law enforcement. In the early hours of the morning, the heavy glass doors of the precinct didn't just open. They were practically thrown off their hinges. Chief Robert Ellison stormed into the lobby. He was a man who usually projected an air of manicured small-town authority. But tonight, he looked like he had seen a ghost. He was wearing suit trousers and a raincoat thrown hastily over a wrinkled pajama shirt. His face was ash white, and he was sweating profusely despite the freezing rain outside. Sergeant Bennett stood up immediately. "Chief, what are you doing here at this hour?" Chief Ellison didn't answer Bennett. His panicked eyes darted around the intake room, locking onto Harlan and Cole, who were standing by the coffee machine. "Ellison," the chief said, his voice trembling, barely a whisper that carried across the room. "Tell me you didn't." Harlan frowned, confused by the chief's erratic behavior. "Didn't what, Chief? We just had a busy night. Pulled a violent vagrant out of the Rusty Spoon. Guy was a menace." Ellison crossed the room in 3 long strides, his face turning from white to a terrifying apoplectic purple. He grabbed Harlan by the collar of his uniform shirt, slamming the younger officer backward into the metal filing cabinets with a deafening crash. "A vagrant!" Ellison screamed, spittle flying from his lips. "A vagrant! Do you have any idea who just called my private home phone, Harlan?" Harlan stammered, his bravado instantly evaporating. Chief, I don't—" "The special agent in charge of the Seattle FBI field office," Ellison roared, his voice cracking with absolute panic, followed 30 seconds later by the state attorney general. "They just woke me up to tell me that a federal judge on the 9th Circuit Court of Appeals is personally filing a Title 18, Section 242, deprivation of rights complaint against my department." Cole dropped his coffee cup. It shattered on the linoleum, the brown liquid pooling around his boots. The entire precinct fell into a dead, horrifying silence. "Who did you arrest, you arrogant son of a bitch?" Ellison demanded, shaking Harlan violently. "Who is in my holding cell?" Sergeant Bennett, his hands visibly shaking, looked down at the booking log. He swallowed hard. "Samuel Whitaker, Chief. They brought him in a little while ago." Ellison let go of Harlan, pushing him away in disgust. He ran a trembling hand through his thinning hair. "God help us," the chief whispered. "The FBI is already on the highway. They're seizing the diner's security footage, and they are coming here to take federal custody of the prisoner." Ellison turned a lethal glare onto Harlan and Cole. Give me your badges. Give me your guns. Right now. Chief, you can't do this without union representation, Harlan protested, his voice high-pitched and defensive. He assaulted me. It's on my body cam. Your body cam is going straight to the Justice Department, you idiot, Ellison snapped, holding out his hand. If you don't hand them over right now, I will have Sergeant Bennett arrest you both for kidnapping. Hand them over. Slowly, with trembling hands, the two officers unpinned the silver shields from their chests and unbuckled their gun belts, laying them on the intake counter. The metallic clatter sounded like the closing of a coffin lid on their careers. Ellison didn't wait. He grabbed the heavy ring of cell keys from Bennett's desk and practically sprinted down the hallway toward the holding block. He reached cell 3, his hands shaking so badly he could barely get the key into the lock. The heavy steel door swung open with a metallic groan. Inside, sitting perfectly still on the freezing metal bench, Samuel Whitaker opened his eyes. He looked at the panicked chief of police, his expression just as calm and unreadable as it had been when Harlan spilled the coffee. "Mr. Whitaker," Chief Ellison breathed, his voice dripping with desperate, terrified respect. "Sir, please, let's get you out of here." Chief Robert Ellison stood in the doorway of holding cell 3, the heavy ring of brass keys rattling uncontrollably in his trembling left hand. The harsh fluorescent light of the corridor spilled into the dark, freezing concrete box, illuminating Samuel Whitaker. The veteran sat perfectly still on the edge of the bolted metal bench, his hands resting calmly on his knees. He didn't look surprised. He did not look relieved. He simply looked at the panicked chief of police with the cold, calculating eyes of a man watching a trap snap shut. "Mr. Whitaker," Chief Ellison repeated, his voice barely more than a raspy whisper. He took a hesitant step into the cell, holding his hands up in a placating, desperate gesture. "Sir, there has been a colossal misunderstanding. The officers involved have been suspended pending an immediate comprehensive internal review. The charges against you are completely dropped. You are entirely free to go. Please, let me personally drive you anywhere you need to be." Samuel did not move a muscle. He remained seated, his breathing slow and rhythmic, entirely unaffected by the freezing air blowing from the overhead vent. "I'm not going anywhere, Chief Ellison," Samuel said, his voice a deep resonant rumble that echoed off the concrete walls. "I was brought into this facility under color of law, charged with resisting arrest and assaulting a police officer. Those are serious felonies. Standard operating procedure dictates a mandatory holding period until arraignment or the posting of bail. I wouldn't want to break protocol." Ellison's face contorted into an expression of sheer agony. A bead of cold sweat tracked down his temple. "Mr. Whitaker, please. I'm officially voiding the arrest. The paperwork hasn't even been submitted to the county prosecutor yet. You're legally a free man. If you stay in this cell, it looks like false imprisonment." "It doesn't look like false imprisonment, Chief," Samuel corrected quietly. "It is false imprisonment, an assault and battery, and a clear violation of Title 18, U.S. Code, Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. I am staying exactly where I am until the chain of custody is officially broken by a federal authority." Ellison swallowed hard, realizing the profound depth of the disaster his men had dragged him into. This man wasn't just a tough old street survivor. He understood the law with terrifying precision. Before Ellison could formulate another desperate plea, the heavy, reinforced steel doors of the precinct sallyport were violently thrust open. The sound of heavy, synchronized footsteps flooded the intake room. It wasn't the slow, lazy shuffle of night shift local cops. It was the sharp, aggressive cadence of a highly trained tactical unit moving with absolute, undeniable purpose. Ellison spun around, leaving the cell door open, and practically sprinted back down the hallway toward the front desk. The lobby of the Silver Creek Police Department had been entirely taken over. 6 men and 2 women, all wearing dark windbreakers with the bright, unmistakable gold lettering of the FBI across their backs, were already securing the premises. Uniformed Washington state troopers stood by the exterior doors, effectively locking down the entire building. No one was getting in, and more importantly, no one was getting out. Standing at the center of the intake room was Special Agent in Charge Thomas Brennan. Brennan was a towering figure in his late 50s, possessing a sharp, hawk-like profile and an aura of uncompromising authority. He didn't look angry. He looked entirely clinical, which was infinitely more terrifying. "Chief Ellison, I presume?" Brennan asked, his voice cutting through the silent room like a scalpel. He didn't wait for an answer. He flashed his golden shield, though it was entirely unnecessary. "Thomas Brennan, FBI Seattle Field Office. We are executing a federal warrant for the immediate seizure of all digital and physical evidence related to the arrest of Samuel Whitaker, including but not limited to body-worn camera footage, dispatch audio, holding cell video, and arresting officer reports. We are also taking immediate custody of the prisoner. Ellison nodded frantically, his hands waving in submission. Yes, of course, Agent Brennan. Full cooperation. The prisoner is in cell 3. The officers involved have already been stripped of their badges and weapons. Brennan's eyes shifted to the corner of the room where Derek Harlan and Brandon Cole were sitting on a wooden bench, their faces pale, their previous arrogance entirely replaced by an abject, suffocating terror. They looked like two deflated balloons. Good, Brennan said sharply. Keep them exactly where they are. Do not let them speak to each other. Do not let them touch their personal cell phones. Agents Miller and Hayes, secure the server room. I want full mirror drives of the entire precinct's digital footprint for the last 48 hours. Agent Vance, bag the officers' duty belts and uniforms. We need them for potential forensic analysis. Brennan turned back to Ellison. Take me to him. Ellison led Brennan down the stark hallway. When they reached cell 3, Brennan stepped inside, instantly feeling the biting cold of the air conditioning. He looked down at Samuel, his expression softening just a fraction. He had read the preliminary file faxed over from Washington, D.C. He knew exactly who was sitting on that metal bench. Staff Sergeant Whitaker? Brennan asked respectfully. Just Sam now, Agent Brennan, Samuel replied, finally standing up. His joints popped audibly in the cold, but his posture was flawless. Judge Caldwell sends his deepest regards, sir, Brennan said, offering his hand, and his apologies that it took us a while to get here. The roads are a mess. We have an EMT unit waiting outside and a tactical transport to look at those ribs and wrists, and a federal transport ready to take you wherever you wish to go. Samuel looked at the offered hand, then firmly shook it. Thank you, Agent. But before I leave, I want my personal effects documented and returned to me, by you, not by them. Understood, Brennan nodded. He turned to Ellison. Bring me his property bin, now. The intake room was as quiet as a tomb. Federal agents moved with practiced silent efficiency, pulling hard drives, bagging evidence, and interviewing the terrified desk sergeant Roy Bennett. Harlan and Cole remained sequestered in the corner, watched over by a stone-faced state trooper who clearly had zero sympathy for their predicament. Chief Ellison hurried behind the booking counter, his hands shaking as he rummaged through the gray plastic property bins. He finally located the one labeled Whitaker, S., and carried it over to the front desk, placing it gently in front of Agent Brennan. Samuel walked slowly out of the holding corridor, flanked by two armed FBI agents. He stepped into the warm intake room, his eyes immediately locking onto Harlan. Harlan flinched physically, shrinking back against the wall, unable to meet the veteran's gaze. The bully had finally met someone he couldn't intimidate, and the realization was crushing him. Brennan began to inventory the plastic bin. One M65 field jacket, olive drab, heavily soiled and soaked, Brennan dictated to an agent taking notes. He lifted the heavy coat, feeling the damp chill radiating from it. 3 crumpled $1 bills, a pack of spearmint gum, 1 older model cellular phone. Brennan then reached into the bin and pulled out the waterproof plastic sleeve. He wiped a droplet of condensation from the exterior and carefully unsealed the top. He slid the contents onto the metal intake counter. First came the DD-214. The paper was old, the edges slightly frayed despite the protective sleeve, but the black ink was clear. Brennan's eyes scanned the document. Name, Samuel James Whitaker. Rank, Staff Sergeant, United States Army. Deployments, multiple, classified. Discharge, honorable. Medical retirement. Brennan stopped reading. He looked up, his eyes hardening as he turned to face Harlan and Cole. Tell me, Officer Harlan, Brennan said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, deadly quiet. When you illegally detained this man, when you shoved him against a plate glass window and wrenched his arms behind your back, did you bother to ask him about his service? Harlan stammered, his eyes wide and panicked. I didn't know, Agent. He looked like he was loitering. He smelled like a man who spent decades carrying the psychological and physical weight of fighting for your right to wear that badge. You absolute disgrace. Brennan cut him off, his voice echoing loudly in the quiet room. Brennan reached into the waterproof sleeve one last time and pulled out the small dark blue velvet box. He flipped the brass hinge open. Sitting on a bed of pristine white satin was a 5-pointed star of silver bearing a smaller silver star within a gold wreath suspended from a red, white, and blue ribbon. The Silver Star, the third highest military decoration for valor in combat, awarded exclusively for gallantry in action against an enemy of the United States. The state troopers in the room immediately stiffened their postures, straightening out of sheer instinctual respect. Chief Ellison gasped, covering his mouth with his hand. Even Desk Sergeant Bennett looked sick to his stomach. "Do you know what this is?" Harlan, Brennan demanded, holding the open box up so the two corrupt cops could see it clearly. "This isn't a participation trophy. This is awarded for pulling wounded men out of a kill zone while taking enemy fire. This man bled into the dirt so you could stand here and act like a tyrant over a cup of diner coffee." Harlan looked like he was going to vomit. Cole buried his face in his hands, finally realizing the apocalyptic magnitude of their mistake. They hadn't just assaulted a civilian, they had brutalized an American hero who happened to be best friends with a federal appellate judge. At that moment, the heavy glass doors to the precinct opened again. A tall, sharply dressed man in a tailored charcoal suit walked in, shaking the rain from his expensive umbrella. He carried a leather briefcase that looked like it cost more than a police cruiser. This was Alexander Reed, one of the most ruthless and high-priced civil rights litigators on the West Coast, retained an hour earlier by Judge Caldwell. Reed didn't even look at the police officers. He walked directly up to Samuel, extending his hand. "Mr. Whitaker, Alexander Reed. Judge Caldwell sends his love and told me to inform you that your pest problem is about to be completely eradicated." Reed turned to Agent Brennan. "Agent, I assume you have secured the security footage from the Rusty Spoon Diner." "We have, Mr. Reed," Brennan confirmed. "We also have a full sworn statement from the waitress, Betty Thompson. She detailed the entire unprovoked assault, including Officer Harlan's explicit threat to falsify health department complaints if she intervened." "Excellent," Reed smiled, though it was a predatory, merciless expression. He finally turned to look at Harlan, Cole, and Chief Ellison. "Gentlemen, my firm will be filing a massive civil suit against the town of Silver Creek, this police department, and you individually by morning. We will be stripping your pensions, seizing your personal assets, and bankrupting this municipality for its unconstitutional vagrancy ordinances." Reed paused, letting the devastating reality sink in. "But before we bankrupt you, the Department of Justice is going to put you in federal prison. And I assure you, former cops who beat up homeless war veterans do not do well in federal lockup." Samuel stepped forward. He didn't gloat. He didn't yell. He simply reached out and gently took the velvet box containing his silver star from Agent Brennan. He snapped the box shut, slid it back into the waterproof sleeve with his discharge papers, and tucked it safely into the inner pocket of his cold, wet M65 jacket. He slipped the heavy jacket back over his shoulders, wincing slightly as the coarse fabric rubbed against his bruised ribs. He looked at Harlan one last time. "You told me I had 30 seconds, Samuel said quietly, his voice carrying the immense, crushing weight of undeniable karma. "I only needed 10. Without another word, Samuel Whitaker turned and walked out the front doors of the precinct, stepping out of the harsh fluorescent lights and into the waiting warmth of the federal transport vehicle, leaving the shattered, ruined careers of two corrupt cops burning in the ashes behind him. By morning, the local news vans had already surrounded the precinct. The story had been picked up by national syndicates. The dash cam footage, the diner's security video, and the audio recording from Samuel's flip phone, which Judge Caldwell had legally submitted into evidence, were playing on a continuous loop across major news networks. The public outcry was instantaneous and absolutely deafening. The hammer of federal justice did not swing slowly. It dropped with the catastrophic force of a meteor. U.S. Attorney Diane Carver, a woman renowned for her zero-tolerance policy on police corruption, personally took over the prosecution. Swiftly thereafter, Derek Harlan and Brandon Cole were officially indicted by a federal grand jury. The charges were staggering. They were not charged with mere assault. They were slapped with multiple counts of violating Title 18, U.S. Code, Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law, alongside federal kidnapping charges for the unlawful transport and witness tampering for Harlan's threats against Betty Thompson. The hard karma hit Harlan first, and it dismantled his life piece by piece. His police union, terrified of the PR nightmare and the looming Department of Justice investigation, immediately disavowed him. His wife, Humiliated by the national spectacle of her husband brutalizing a homeless black veteran, filed for divorce and took their children to live with her parents in Oregon. Unable to post the massive federal bail, Harlan sat in a maximum security county jail, ironically placed in solitary confinement for his own protection from the general population, many of whom he had previously arrested. Cole, recognizing the sheer hopelessness of their situation, broke within days. He accepted a plea deal, turning state's evidence against his former partner in exchange for a slightly reduced sentence. He stood in federal court, weeping openly, testifying about Harlan's long history of targeting the homeless and falsifying reports. But the judge showed no mercy. Cole was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison, permanently stripped of his pension, and barred from ever holding public office again. Harlan, arrogant to the bitter end, attempted to take his case to trial. It was a spectacular legal slaughter. Alexander Reed, representing Samuel in the civil arena, worked in tandem with the U.S. Attorney's Office to dismantle every lie Harlan told. The jury returned a guilty verdict after brief deliberation. Derek Harlan was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 14 years in a federal penitentiary in Leavenworth, Kansas. The bully had finally been caged. The fallout extended far beyond the two officers. The Department of Justice Civil Rights Division launched a sweeping top-to-bottom investigation into the Silver Creek Police Department. They uncovered a systemic pattern of abuse, falsified warrants, and constitutional violations. Chief Robert Ellison was forced to resign in absolute disgrace, losing a significant portion of his retirement benefits. The town's mayor, who had heavily pushed the unconstitutional anti-vagrancy ordinance, was recalled in a special election by a furious constituency. The police department was subsequently placed under a strict federal consent decree overseen by an independent monitor. Then came the civil suit. Alexander Reed made good on his promise. He filed a monstrous lawsuit against the municipality. The town, facing guaranteed bankruptcy if the case went before a jury, settled out of court for a staggering $8.5 million. Samuel Whitaker did not care about the money. He had survived jungles, deserts, and the freezing rain of Elm Street. Wealth meant nothing to a man who only valued peace. But he understood the power the money provided. His first act as a multi-millionaire was a quiet one. He purchased the building that housed the Rusty Spoon Diner. He didn't evict the current owner. Instead, he signed the deed directly over to Betty Thompson. He established an irrevocable trust to cover all her property taxes and maintenance for the next 30 years. Betty, who had risked her own livelihood to defend him when he had nothing, never had to worry about money or a cruel boss ever again. The diner flourished with a small framed replica of a silver star hanging proudly behind the register. As for Samuel, he finally left the concrete streets behind. He purchased a secluded, heavily wooded 40-acre cabin property in the Cascade Mountains. It was quiet, peaceful, and far away from the flashing lights of sirens. Months later, a black government SUV slowly crunched up the long gravel driveway of Samuel's new property. Judge Philip Caldwell stepped out dressed in casual weekend clothes rather than his judicial robes. He found Samuel sitting on a wide wooden porch overlooking a serene glassy lake, drinking coffee from a heavy ceramic mug. Caldwell walked up the steps and sat in the rocking chair next to his old friend. He didn't say a word at first. He just listened to the wind rustling through the pine trees. "Pest problem sorted?" Caldwell finally asked, a faint smile playing on his lips. Samuel took a slow sip of his coffee, feeling the warm, comforting heat spread through his chest. He looked out at the tranquil water, his posture relaxed for the first time in years. "Yes, sir," Samuel replied softly, loud and clear. It was an incredibly satisfying conclusion to a story of absolute karma. Watching arrogant, corrupt bullies like Harlan and Cole go from terrorizing the vulnerable to sitting in federal prison was the ultimate reality check. They thought they held all the power, but they completely underestimated the unbreakable bond of brotherhood between a decorated war hero and the powerful men whose lives he saved. It just goes to show that you never truly know who you are dealing with, and the universe has a very strict way of balancing the scales. If this story resonated with you and you want more gripping tales of real-life drama where the bad guys get exactly what they deserve, be sure to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss out on our next thrilling story. In the powerful true story of Samuel Whitaker, we discover a life lesson that cuts straight to the heart. Never judge others by their appearance or situation, for every person you meet carries a hidden story of courage, sacrifice, and strength that could change everything in an instant. Samuel, a decorated war hero reduced to homelessness, faced brutal humiliation from officers who saw only a helpless target in his soaked field jacket and quiet demeanor. They never imagined the silver star tucked inside, or the lifelong debt owed by a powerful federal judge whose life Samuel had saved years earlier in combat. Their arrogance and abuse of authority led not to victory but to shattered careers, federal indictments, and the complete collapse of their world. While Samuel's dignity and one single phone call brought justice, protected the kind waitress who stood up for him and gave him a new beginning. This reminds us in our daily lives that the people we might dismiss, the homeless, the elderly, the struggling, could be carrying medals of honor, unbreakable bonds, or quiet power we can't see. Treating everyone with kindness and respect isn't just moral, it's wisdom. Because cruelty has a way of circling back with devastating force, and compassion can open doors we never knew existed. The universe balances the scales. Often to ocean through unexpected channels, proving that no badge or position makes anyone untouchable when they harm the vulnerable. What would you have done if you witnessed such injustice in that diner? Would you have spoken out or stayed silent? Share your honest feelings and experiences in the comments below. I read and cherish every single one. If this emotional story of hidden heroes, raw karma, and the triumph of integrity moved you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt real-life dramas, and activate the notification bell so you stay connected to stories that inspire hope and reflection.